Okay, good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining us. If I could just remind you just to keep your mics muted. You can have your camera on if you want, if you wish, but if you could just keep your mics muted just as we go through. I'm aware of time, so I think we'll just get for this Grow My SME webinar. This is one of many webinars that the Humber Growth Hub run as part of the Grow My SME program. If you're not aware of that, then this is essentially an umbrella program that is designed to help businesses in the Humber region to grow, thrive, revive, survive, and all the other big words in there, but ultimately to help the businesses to continue to be successful. Particularly prevalent in the time that we're in, and everyone's experiencing all sorts of issues right now, primarily as a result of the pandemic. But this is particularly relevant anyway, this support, whether we was in a COVID-19 crisis or not. Because we're in a world where we have to keep moving and we have to keep being agile and we have to keep trying to think differently about the way we take our businesses forward. So these webinars are one way that the Growth Hub are trying to do that, with a particular focus on digital technology. And this is important, again, really because we're very much in a digital first, a digital led world, a digital first consumer, and everything's a bit more, well, everything's much more connected now. And you know, if we're not adapting to this, then you know, you're going to be in trouble, essentially. So that we really want to make sure that businesses in our region are adopting and adapting digital technology and understand its capabilities, so that they can be agile and move about and make sure that they can move as the market moves. So that's what these webinars are about. In addition to these webinars, there's all sorts of other further business support from the Humber Growth Hub. For direct support and one-to-one support for businesses to help you continue to thrive and grow. And again, right now, in the time that we're in, this would be a perfect time to be grasping that. There's a particular type of support called the Digital Catalyst Program, which I'd like to speak to you about at the end of this. So if you bear with us at the end, and I can tell you what support's available to you directly as for your particular business. It's all free of charge, it's all accessible, and it's all about kind of holding your hand and sort of guiding you through changes and helping you grow. So that's what that'll be about. Today, what we're talking about, smart cities. So it's an introduction to smart cities. Again, leaning back to this whole digital conversation, it's probably one of those terms that you've heard floating around in various news articles and on LinkedIn and whatnot. But you know, all very true. The regions and cities are advancing. We're using digital technology to automate more, learn more, connect more. And as a result, we're living differently and working differently. Again, highlighted quite graphically in the last few months about the way that we need to work and the way that we need to monitor, etc. So today's really is very much an overview of smart cities, where, you know, if there's anyone on that's got like real detail into this, then it's not going to be drilling down too much into that. It's very much a top level view of what an introduction to smart cities and what the capabilities are, maybe what the future looks like, and ultimately how you as businesses or as just as people living in a city might need to adapt to make sure that you're moving to this. Quick introduction, my name's Wayne Willis. I'm one of the innovation consultants at Edenic Group. I'm joined by Rob Lewis and my colleague Jamie Del Grosso. Jamie's going to be taking us through most of today's presentation. And just before we kick off, I'd just like to say that if you've got any questions or any comments, we don't really like death by webinar, so we do welcome these to be as interactive as possible. Ask away, drop us something in the chat box. If you want to jump on camera and talk to us, do that. We're very happy to speak to you and kind of tailor answers specifically to your business. And there'll be time for questions at the end as well. With that, I think we'll move on. Jamie, I'll hand over to you, and we'll get rolling.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, my mic's on. Great. So as Wayne said, my name is Jamie. We're from a company called the Edenic Group. So the Edenic Group is an innovation consultancy, and we work with brands all across the globe to help them develop new innovation strategies and products. And the way that we do this is through something we call the 3Ds. So the 3Ds are our three core principles for innovation. And these are to be disruptive, think differently, and embrace digital. So just before we get into the kind of meaty bit of today's topic, I just want to sort of focus on this embrace digital side of the 3Ds. Just to look at, as Wayne had mentioned during the intro, what sort of digital is doing to the business landscape, how it's changing the way the world works, and kind of what the future looks like a little bit of digital. So we can really understand sort of the importance and the growth in this market. So firstly, when we talk about digital, what we're talking about is the use of physical technology or virtual technology to aid in a function or operation. So that's hardware or software. And to put that into perspective in terms of business and what that may look like. So a business that grows and is of a significant scale, that maybe operates across different borders, previously would have to look something like this. So you would need large infrastructure, you would need lots of people doing lots of different jobs. It would be quite a costly operation, and to scale up and grow would actually be quite an investment. The benefit to this was that if you are in a marketplace and you are a successful business in that marketplace, you were always aware of who your competitors were, because they would also need to have this level of infrastructure and investment, and it was very hard for that to go unnoticed. So you'd always be able to see kind of where the threats were coming from. Nowadays, a business of that same scale and that same ability might look something like this. So there's a huge amount of stories of very successful companies nowadays that was started from a laptop, normally someone working in a back bedroom with an idea. So it's actually much cheaper and much easier now to start a business and to scale it up to something where you can actually disrupt businesses that have been in that landscape for a very long time. So if we look at things like Airbnb was actually started from a college dorm in America with a couple of guys who had a huge hall, a huge dorm that they were in, and basically bought a load of air beds, blew them up, and then rented them out to people that couldn't find college dorms. So that's actually where Airbnb came from. They realized this was a kind of cool idea, using space and existing buildings. And they put together a website and sort of put it out there. And now it's one of the biggest disruptors to the hotel and hospitality industry. So, these companies can be pieced together very cheaply, very quickly, and become a very significant threat to existing businesses. Also, if you are a new business yourself, this is kind of great, because this means that you're able to scale up your operations pretty easily without all the investment that previous businesses would have needed. So this here is an example of kind of where we're going with technology. So this kind of funny animation is actually from a computer called Google DeepMind. So Google DeepMind is a machine learning computer that is able to come up with its own solutions to problems. So when we talk about things like artificial intelligence, basically most computers or AI is pre-programmed. So it will have programmed into it, when this happens, I must do this. And essentially it's just following patterns and doing as it's programmed. The concept of machine learning is that it doesn't know that answer, but it's able to figure out that answer itself. It's able to look at the variables and come up with a solution. So in this particular scenario, Google gave Google DeepMind a humanoid figure and sort of an obstacle course, and said, figure out the easiest way to move this humanoid figure from point A to point B. And basically, without ever seeing a human walk or anything, this machine learning computer was able to figure out the mechanics of walking in only 3 hours. So if we consider how long it takes a human to understand the mechanics of walking compared to the 3 hours it took for this computer to figure out the mechanics of walking, despite the fact it'd never seen a human walk or it had no reference, this shows that we're actually moving to a world where we have computers that can do these very powerful computations and think of solutions very quickly, probably much more quickly than we can. And people are already integrating this into business. So there's already, you can integrate apps and software and all sorts of things with these computers already. They're actually available for the public to use. and people are using them for all sorts of things to build bots and analytics tools to sort of predict things that are going to happen. People use it for stock markets to predict, which stocks are going to go up and down and when and how much to invest. So this really shows the progression of digital and actually the world that we're moving into, to a point where we are much more reliant on computers and machines, but also we're able to use them to benefit us much more quickly and in a way that we wouldn't be able to do ourselves. So this graph here is actually from a company called The Emerging Future. And The Emerging Future look at how technology is going to impact us in the future and what that is going to look like. So they did a bit of research where they were looking at technological advancement, how we'd got to where we were now, and the speed that we were advancing in technology. So they basically said within this report that every time we develop a new wave of technology, that wave helps us develop the next wave of technology. So that technology in turn provides us with tools and knowledge and insight to actually develop further technology. So it's like a snowball effect. And the more we develop, the quicker our advancement in technology is. So they looked at the advancement that we had so far and kind of that pattern. And they said, if we follow this existing pattern and this advancement that we have so far, in the next 5 years, they predicted we will be 32 times more advanced than we are today. So 32 times more technical capabilities than we have today. When they sort of looked at that over a further period of time, so over 10 years, following that same pattern, they thought we would be 1,000 times more advanced, and over 20 years, 1,000,000 times more advanced. So this does seem like a huge jump in this really kind of steep curve. But if we think already about the technology we have nowadays, so when a new piece of tech comes out, when the smartphone was released, how that changed the world around us, how many new bits of technology were created because that existed. All the apps that we use nowadays, all these bots and things that are helping people run businesses and do all these amazing things. If we'd never had that smartphone, we would not have had those bits of technology and those developments. When you kind of look at it like that, you can see how we're kind of creating this snowball effect and we're getting faster and faster in our advancement.
Yeah, Jamie, I just wanted to touch upon as well. It's just worth noting that in the last sort of decade, really 10 to 15 years, with the advancement that we've seen. And I was thinking about this again this morning and thinking, we're actually, it's one of those things, where you're in it so you don't see it kind of thing. And when you're in it, you just kind of live in the life. And then you kind of look back on, say, the last decade and you say, oh, would you believe that 10 years ago, like we were doing this, or 10 years ago we had this, or this is how we traveled, or whatever it was you're talking about. So the technology will never be as slow as it is today. The advancement is so quick, and it's graphically moving very quickly. And these charts that Jamie's showing here in terms of what that looks like and our capabilities in 5, 10 or 20 years or 50 years or whatever, is actually not that hard to grasp. It's not going to be long before we're in 2030 and we're not having vehicles, petrol vehicles, and everything's electric, and all of these things are moving very, very quickly. So the importance of recognizing that change, I think, is stage one, so that you can adapt to it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think if you look at the idea of a smartphone, like I mentioned, for pretty much everyone on this call, if you think about what was the first phone you bought, and for most people, it's probably some sort of brick kind of Nokia 3310 thing that sort of ran Snake and whatever else. And then think about the last phone that you bought or have in your pocket now. Just think about the difference in technology and what they're able to do. Now, that is not a massive sort of period of time for that technology advancement to take place. And then if we look at kind of the last year's model of phones and then this year's model of phones and the leaps in technology that are going on there, you can see that actually we're developing much more quickly as time goes on. Another really good example of this, which actually leads quite nicely into today's topic, is the voice assistants. So most people will either have or know someone who has or has seen these kind of virtual assistants. So this is the Amazon Alexa. I'm sorry if anyone's got one in your house, I've just triggered it, by the way. But there's lots of these. So we have the Echo, there's the Google version, we've got Siri. Most people in their house or on their phone have some form of voice assistant. It's actually becoming quite commonplace in most technology. And these devices are actually allowing us to look at computing and look at technology in a completely different way, because they have brought to the consumer market what we call conversational computing. So this is something that's existed for quite a long time, but it's always kind of been something that essentially kind of techies play with, and it's never really been a huge consumer product. We had kind of little bits of it with Siri and some of the phones that were coming out, smartphones. But what Amazon did, and what all these other companies are doing right now, is they're creating a consumer product that is reasonably priced, that most people have, that brings this idea of conversational computing into the house. So if you have one of these, there is now a new platform for people to start developing on top of. So this, like we mentioned before, is the starting point of that new wave, of that next wave of things that can be created, because there's a new opportunity there. There's something that wasn't there before, that most people didn't have in the house, but now is so commonplace that even most TVs have this technology built in. So that leads us quite nicely onto the idea of a smart city. And before we get into sort of what a smart city looks like, first of all, I want to go through what does it mean for a city to be smart? So what does that term actually mean? It's something that gets stuck onto a lot of technology products now. So, I mean, you can go and buy a smart kettle if you want, you can get a smart toaster, but what does it actually mean? What is smart about this technology? So just to break it down into sort of very simple terms, the easiest way for us to look at this is start with a device that we all know really well. So the smartphone. So this is probably one of the most prominent uses of the word smart in technology. And if we sort of think about what a smartphone is, it can give us a better understanding of what really justifies that terminology, what justifies something being a smart product. So mobile phones, as we mentioned, have existed for a long time, and well before smartphones came about, mobile phones were still, a very widespread consumer product. Most people had something in their pockets. Most people had them as a means of communication. But basically what happened when smartphones came about is they brought together enhanced connectivity through ability to connect to Wi-Fi, through 3G and 4G. You were able to download apps, you had better camera, better screens. So basically by bringing all this together and putting it into one device, the phone was no longer just a tool for making phone calls or texting. It was a tool that could allow you to check the weather, or do your banking online, or respond to emails, or nowadays you can use it to change the temperature in your house and turn your heating on and off. And it brought all of these things together in one device. So basically it was a tool to simplify the day-to-day tasks that we all do. So this is kind of the crux of what a smart device is. It's the idea of this interconnectivity and this simplification of all these various aspects that are around us. So if we take this to a slightly bigger scale and we go from a smartphone to the smart home, so again, this is something that probably most people are aware of. Maybe people have got some smart home technology of their own, but basically this term smart home is something that is attached to most electronic devices that you can purchase nowadays. They're smart home ready or smart home enabled. And basically all that means is that they are able to communicate with the other devices in your home, and using something like an Alexa device, you are able to trigger commands, or trigger a sequence of commands from one point, so from one trigger point, whether that is an Alexa device or your phone or whatever it may be. So most smart homes will be controlled by a voice assistant, as we mentioned earlier. And this means that the user can actually interact with most parts of their house without having to leave the sofa. So they can automate lights and heating, control the TVs and all sorts of other things. And another important aspect of a smart home, which leads us nicely into the idea of a smart city, is these automation sequences. So something that we often refer to as a scene. So an automation sequence is essentially a chain reaction of automations based on a singular trigger. So for example, if we look at the idea of a smart home, a user may have a sequence where when Netflix is opened, Alexa knows they're maybe about to watch a film. So it will trigger a movie watching sequence, which may turn down the lights, turn on the surround sound, turn it to a certain volume, maybe send a message to the kids to say, leave me alone, I'm watching a film. You know, you can trigger all of these from one single point. And this is really where smart homes came into their own, when people could start doing this. But also this kind of led into the bigger thinking on the idea of smart and automation and what it could do. And the other side of this was, if you have a smart home, if you have lots of connected devices, you are producing lots and lots of data. So this data could be used for the user to basically to get an understanding of how they're using the devices in their house, to understand energy consumption, to understand carbon emissions, all kinds of things. But also it had a huge benefit to the companies that were developing these products, because for the first time they were able to get real-world data, real-time data of how their products were being used in the home, what other products were they being used in sequence with. And this allowed manufacturers and tech companies to improve their products and build better products on real-world data that didn't exist before. So obviously it makes sense that people would look at this, look at the idea of data collection and automation and making processes simpler, and apply this thinking to the concept of a city and create a citywide level of hyperconnectivity and data. So when we're talking about a smart city, obviously the interaction points are slightly different, but with the correct infrastructure, a smart city could do things such as monitoring traffic and transport, looking at air quality, creating smart lighting, and we've got some examples of how other countries have created cities with smart lighting further into the presentation. It can monitor noise, temperature, energy usage, which is really big for sustainability, governance, policing, and carbon emissions. So just through very basic sensors and basic interconnectivity, we're able to manage and monitor all these various aspects, which when brought together allows us to create a city that is more efficient and is much better for the people that are living in it. So this is actually something that is already been put in place. So there's a lot of different cities that you can find examples of how they've used this smart idea. So firstly, in Barcelona, the city of Catalonia, they've actually put in place a lot of AI-powered smart sensors, and they monitor everything from traffic management to smart lighting, noise, carbon emissions, and a big one is rainfall. And actually the reason behind this is not so long ago, they actually had a situation where they were running out of water and the city was going through rolling blackouts. And this is actually because there were so many people, so overpopulated, they couldn't manage the resources very well. So basically to combat this, the city invested in some smart city technology, and they put this in place so that they could monitor all these different aspects, what the rainfall was doing and how much energy was being used. And they could sort of preempt where there may have been issues, and they could reallocate resources before there was an issue. And this is another big part of the idea of smart cities. It's not just about dealing with things then, it's not just about the real-time data. It's creating those predictive algorithms where you can kind of look at it and say, there's a good chance this may happen, so I can take action now to protect my city, protect the buildings, keep people safe, keep people happy. And this is a major benefit of the smart city infrastructure. Another more close to home example is London. So London built a huge data network which was set up to reduce congestion in the city. So anyone that's been around London, you've probably seen these cameras everywhere that are monitoring what cars are about on which roads and then where those cars are traveling to, so they can understand where the busy areas are, kind of what traffic is doing. And they put all of this data into what they call the London Data Store. The London Data Store is actually a completely open database that anyone in the public can access for free, with the intention that people can use this data of, you know, all the things that they're collecting, from traffic to weather to all various other sensors, and people could build their own projects to improve the city. So it's actually something that, if you are interested in seeing what data may be produced from a smart city, you can Google the London Data Store, and it's all there, and there's all the graphs, and you can actually see all the different things that they're tracking and what predictions and what insights they're able to find from those sensors. And it's actually a really interesting way to get an understanding of how you can use the idea of a smart city to give you a little bit more insight and a little bit more thought about how a city is running and how you can create those predictive algorithms.
Of course, Jamie, as well, London has Transport for London, of course, which is another gigantic data collection. I mean, there's something like 8 million people in that city, and a large proportion of them are using some form of Transport for London infrastructure, whether that's the tube or the buses or whatever. And every one of them involves a scanning in and a scanning out. And so you can see the movement of people, the different areas of London, how many people are moving where, at what times of day. I mean, it's really, really massive data. And of course, that knock-on effect of that data is what's happening in each of the regional economies around that particular station, and what's going on in terms of footfall, in terms of, you know, pollution, in terms of spend, economy, leisure. I mean, all of that's, you know, is so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, a lot of these data sets kind of cross over and actually are used in collaboration to create these predictions of, you know, where people are moving to and what people's health is in certain areas. And the Transport for London data set actually is part of this London Data Store. And again, you can access it and you can actually look at, you know, all the data they're collecting, which is really interesting. And if anyone has ever been to London, a lot of people use that. I think it's City Mapper or whatever the app's called. Again, that all uses the same data set, which is how they know kind of where buses are and how long they're going to be and all the rest of it. And finally, Singapore. So the Prime Minister of Singapore has said that he is on a quest to make Singapore the first smart nation, whatever a smart nation looks like. So basically what they've done is they've put an unbelievable amount of sensors around Singapore. They've put sensors in to do pretty much everything. I was starting to write a list and I ended up just removing the list because it became so ridiculous. But they track everything from the things you'd expect, like transport, health, logistics, to a point where they actually have sensors in to see how clean a street is and are people littering. They have sensors to detect if someone is smoking outside of a designated smoking area. They have so many things in to keep Singapore this smart city, and their Prime Minister has created this project, which was back in 2014. So it's only been going for about 5 years, but already it's becoming one of the most connected cities in the world, just because of the huge amount of data that they're collecting and using. So that's a bit of an extreme example, but again, it's just interesting to see the different use cases. So it's, you know, when we think about smart city, the idea of controlling traffic seems obvious, but seeing if you stood in the smoking hut or if you stood outside of it seems like quite an extreme use of the technology, but it's interesting to see kind of how different people have used it. So another thing that's probably worth covering, and a lot of people may already know this one, but if you don't, a huge bit of the terminology for a smart city or anything that's smart, a smart home or whatever, is the idea of the Internet of Things. So when we talk about hyperconnectivity and connected devices, the term that you'll hear a lot is Internet of Things or IoT. So if someone talks about an IoT device, what does that mean, and why is it called that? So basically, the best way to understand this is to think of computers, home computing. So looking at when home computers came about, and we had these big boxy things that were, they were very innovative at the time, but essentially they just allowed for basic word processing, number processing, and some sort of early stage development. So as sort of interesting as these were, so as innovative as they were, the home computer didn't really sort of take off until the sort of internet came about. So basically people started connecting these computers together, networking all these computers so that they could share bits of information. And this is actually sort of the early stages of the internet as we know it today. So by having all these computers connected, people were able to send electronic mail, share files, create essentially web pages that people could access from different computers. And this was a huge turning point in the home computing landscape, because this took what was essentially a stationary device, a thing that was in your home, it was yours and couldn't do much else, to essentially becoming a portal to this much bigger world, to becoming essentially a connected device. So this is where the namesake Internet of Things comes from. The idea of this interconnectivity of all these things talking together and sharing data. So when we talk about the Internet of Things, we're talking about any type of electronic device. So anything that is able to connect to the internet or connect to a network or produce its own network is able to be an IoT device. It can connect to something else to pass on information or receive information and use this as a way to determine an action. So for example, if you have a house that has a smart lock on the door, the smart lock, for example, may be able to detect that it is left open, it's not being locked. In turn, that could then speak to your router and determine, are any of your mobile devices connected to this Wi-Fi network, for example? If not, there's a good chance you're probably not in the building, you're not at home. So you've left and you might have left the door unlocked. So then it could automatically send a notification to your phone saying you've left the front door unlocked. So basically by having that connectivity, it's able to become more functional, more useful. A smart lock on its own that every time you locked it said, you've unlocked me, would be really annoying. But a smart lock that is able to use information from other devices to determine whether it should be locked or not is now a really interesting commercial offer to the consumer, and it's much more functional, much more useful. So this is why we talk about the Internet of Things. And this is essentially kind of the core principle that makes all of this work. It's that passing back and forth of data. So if we look at this on a much bigger level, then essentially we can look at how the idea of data passing back and forth can allow us to build a smart city. So any kind of smart city or smart infrastructure will essentially have these kind of key points. So it centers around 3 or 4 elements and then an output, whatever the desired output may be. So the first step in any of these workflows, whether it's a smart home or city, will always be a trigger. So a trigger or a sensor are actions that basically begin a sequence of events or create a data point. So for example, if you have a city that is measuring weather conditions, then you may have barometers all over the city in different areas, rainfall sensors, light sensors, and by collecting all of this data and bringing it together, you are able to maybe make predictions on what the weather is in certain areas or what it will be. So each of these individual points is a sensor or a trigger. It's essentially the thing that is collecting that data, that real world data, and then that is the start point of what happens next. And the next point is the data store. So this is that data that's being collected. So for example, the rainfall is at this level, is then sent to the data store. So the data store, which is also sometimes called like a data lake, but more commonly a data store when you talk about large infrastructure projects, is basically a set of servers and databases which store all of this information in together. So unlike other kind of databases and things, the idea of this is that all of it from all the different sensors is stored together so that the data can be cross-referenced and patterns can be detected. So once we have those patterns, this allows us to then start making assumptions based on the data. So for example, if we do have those rainfall sensors about the city and a large area is recording high rainfall in one particular region, then it's a reasonable assumption to think that there may be a flood risk in that area because of the high rainfall. So that sensor is feeding into the data store, which is then able to combine that data to create a data set which can create a prediction. So that prediction is done by the AI algorithm or data analysis. So basically, we take all that data, we use this AI engine to create some sort of prediction. So, okay, this area will have high rainfall, therefore it may be at risk of flooding, and then an action is triggered. So they may have a flood protection sequence, which would warn residents and put in place protections for buildings, which would automatically be triggered. And all this happens very quickly. So from that sensor registering that high rainfall, this process happens quickly and is able to protect buildings, protect residents from what could be a major issue. Also, we kind of have these tangents that come off from this data. So a lot of people will also use what we call data visualization from the data store. So that is taking all of that data that we've been collecting, and rather than starting to make all these predictions, it's taking all of it and putting it straight into some sort of form of graph or something we can see. And this essentially creates a real-time snapshot of whatever is happening in a city. So we can use this almost as, kind of a window into what is happening citywide in various aspects. So we can see what is happening with traffic in real time, what is happening with weather in real time, all these various things. So when we combine both of these, we have real-time analytics and we have predictive analytics that are telling us what may happen and what things to be aware of and creating actions based on it. And finally, a lot of these data sets are actually sent out to the public and given for free to the public for third-party utilization. So that is basically like the London data store, putting all of data together, saying, here you go, you can access this for completely free to develop new platforms and new solutions to better the city and to help us develop further progress. So that data can actually be used in lots of different ways, and it can be used to benefit the city in lots of different ways. But the key part of that is always having the right sensors to get that information, collecting the correct information, having a large enough quantity of it, and then finally understanding what those outputs should be. So it's kind of put there in like a very basic graph, but actually, as you can imagine, if you're looking at a whole city, that is a very large project, and actually that's a lot of small pieces to fit together to kind of create these predictions and create these algorithms. But luckily, some very smart people have actually already done this in cities around the world, and the majority of them have actually provided all that insight and how they've done all these things for free for other people to use and develop their own solutions and look at sort of how they could build their own cities into smarter cities. So a lot of the work has been done, and actually we are developing much more quickly when it comes to citywide smart technology such as this.
Yeah, it's worth noting, Jamie, I know you're going to come on to this in a second, but and we'll go in a bit more detail, but it's worth noting that when we talk about these sensors and triggers, I mean, what makes a city smart, and there's some that are far more advanced than others, but really we're still in the kind of early adoption of some of this stuff. But what really makes it smart is that literally just about everything you can think of in your everyday lives, and probably most of the things that you can't think of, can be connected into this in some way. You know, we talked about the weather and we're talking about the traffic. You might be talking about waste or food. It could be the movement of people. It could be when you cross over the Humber Bridge and you use the bridge toll. I mean, literally everything you can imagine. All of our movements, our purchases, our banking, all of this stuff. You know, essentially, as Jamie said earlier, if it can connect to the internet, ultimately, then there's a way to link off it and use it to influence something or influence an action. And it might not always be an action. It could be a real-time thing. You know, maybe they'll slow down the changing of the traffic lights if the A63 is looking particularly rammed or something like that. You know, so there's real-time consequences, and then there's longer-term consequences over a period of so many years. How wet has the city been compared to the previous 5 years to that, or whatever? And that all affects kind of how that region develops. You know, maybe you start looking at coastal recession and erosion and things like that. You know, all of these things all come off the back of it. And we're quite fortunate in a way, because most of this stuff we were monitoring in very much real time. It was certainly in my lifetime, in early days, where you would have people stood at the side of the road with a clipboard counting cards with a clicker, you know, to how much traffic was moving or what the movement of people was. And now, you know, all of this stuff can be very much automated, and we can see sort of trends. And also, we're already kind of on the cusp of, we are really very much in a smart time, I guess, and in smart cities. What the difference is how those things connect and how we use the data to then influence the output of it, as opposed to just having random bits of collections of data. So that's what makes it smart, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things is, as we have developed this understanding of you know, smart cities, smart homes, we've actually got a better understanding of data as well. So we're actually able to create, to actually make predictions and sort of make assumptions based on this data. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a safe assumption that if your mobile phone, which most people have with them all the time, disconnects from your Wi-Fi, you've probably left the area, you've left your house. So actually, you don't need sort of the direct sensor, like you don't need to basically have something stuck to you all the time that says where you are. But by using the data we're collecting from these various other sensors and triggers, we can actually combine this with sort of what we know about people's habits to make a lot of assumptions and a lot of predictions. So actually, you know, that one sensor could actually inform maybe 5 or 6 different data sets. And you know, again, pulling all this together creates a much smarter ecosystem, a smarter city. So some examples of how this is being used and various use cases for it. So if we look at municipal services, so, you know, sort of the more boring side of managing a city, you know, waste disposal, that kind of thing. There's some really cool examples of how people have actually managed to do this in a really interesting way using the idea of a smart city. So basically, this is Songdo or Songdo. So this is a developing smart city in South Korea. And the whole purpose of this was to become the smart business district. So it was very much focused on business owners and people buying big skyscrapers there and setting up businesses there. But they wanted everything and the whole way of life to be based on everything being smart. So at the moment, although they're only about halfway through building this, the estimated population of Songdo is about 70,000 people. And despite this quite substantial amount of people living in this quite small city, the residents of Songdo will never see a rubbish truck or a garbage truck. And that's because they have a large subterranean infrastructure for all of these municipal services. So basically all of the waste disposal goes into these bins and it's sucked into big pipes under the city, which determine where to send that waste. So for example, if it's registered as a bag of recyclable things, it goes and it's recycled. If it's registered as general waste that can't be recycled, it goes to large underground incinerators, which are then burnt. And that is used, so that waste is used to power the city further. So it's this huge underground network that is all happening that we are unable to see. And I think that's a really clever use of this technology because, one, it makes life a lot better for the residents. We don't have, you know, garbage disposal trucks on the streets. It keeps everything much cleaner, and it's adding to the sustainability of that place because they aren't sending anything to landfills. It's either being recycled or burnt and used as energy. So a really interesting use of smart technology, and obviously by using these systems, using these, I think it's a type of bag represents, you know, whether it's recyclable or whatever. They're able to monitor all this and collect data on how much recycling they're doing, how much waste is being produced, which areas are producing the most waste. And then again, that allows them to look at city planning and you know, sort of future developments in that city in a much more intelligent way. Another example of how this is being used and this sort of smart technology is in education. So there's a lot of institutions now, educational institutions that are using technology to kind of bring learning to life. So people have done for a while kind of have used things like augmented reality and virtual reality to kind of create experiences to enhance learning. But actually, if we look at the idea of a smart city, then we can start looking at the idea of connecting these services and creating integrated systems with things like location data, using devices to track kind of the progress of students and understand how each student is progressing, understand how different schools are performing, and take preventative actions to prevent things like dropouts or poor performance in various institutions. So this, again, allows for that data to be collected so that predictions can be made and planning can be put into place to constantly improve these kind of educational institutions.
Yeah, Jimmy, Rob, I know you had some thoughts on like immersive learning. It was something that was quite interesting to you, so I'll let you jump on that. But I was just going to touch upon the, particularly with universities, it's really interesting because people are traveling across the country to go to different universities, and the student dropout rate, you know, for a different uni is quite a major impact on them, and they've certainly seen this during the COVID movement. You know, essentially less people paying student fees affects the university and its capabilities of what it can do, because it's reliant quite heavily on the fees coming from the students. Now, so therefore, to make the student experience stronger, and also to retain the students, to avoid dropouts, and making sure that there's always high attainment and they're not getting rubbish results, and you know, they're staying in lectures long enough, etc., etc. Using smart technology, there's various kind of routes to go down to do that. And that goes right from day one of the student arriving at the institution and just trying to find their way, you know, down to literally like navigating, having a map of the university, and it directing them to their first introduction lecture and showing them where the canteen is, and sending them their personalized timetable, letting the professor that they're seeing know how often they're in the classes, and you know, if they're leaving often, or, you know, I mean, when the book gets checked into the library, when it gets checked back out, you know, all of these things are all connected things, which are all just pulling from databases, you know, and combining with our devices and location data and all that. And having that information is really, really relevant, because then you can give a very, very specific personalized experience to that student, but also then connect it to kind of their time in the city and where they go and where they're venturing to, and, you know, how that impacts the local economy. You know, you can really start building up these things. So core areas like universities are a good area to go there. And Rob, you was interested in kind of the technology stuff for enhancing learning as well.
Yeah, Wayne, sorry, I was on mute then. You had me muted, so I couldn't say anything.
Oh, sorry, apologies.
It's all right. I don't feel targeted. Obviously, for anyone on the call who's got kids, we're seeing our kids having their education delivered remotely, and in my opinion, it's been done quite badly in one of my kids' schools and done really well in the other kids' school. But what I think is really interesting about technology in this format is you can effectively give kids access to the best teachers in the world. So there's no reason why the best teachers in the world can't teach everyone on the planet through technology. And I think if we move to a really smart way of delivering education in each education authority, we should be choosing the best teachers and allowing them to augment the teaching of other teachers who are maybe not as experienced or not as effective in their teaching, or, you know, using the best teachers from the best schools to help the poorest kids in the poorest schools. So I think it's a really interesting way to democratize education through technology, which I don't think anyone's doing just yet, but perhaps it's something that we could catch up with.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. And it's also, it kind of links to this, almost that kind of term sharing economy in a weird way. You know, it's that kind of nationalization of education and equaling the playing field. So, I mean, if you go back to that kind of the COVID thing, again, sorry to keep using the C word, but it's particularly prevalent in what we're talking about. There's a lot of schools and education establishments that have had to figure out how to continue learning in the time that's unprecedented, you know, where the kids aren't there and they're at home. Not all of them have the best devices to connect to. I mean, there's all sorts of issues surrounding that. And of course, each school, even within, it's not even regional, but almost each individual school within a region has had to deal with it in their own way. what's the best way for us to deliver this syllabus to make sure the information is still getting across and the students getting the best education experience. And universities are certainly experiencing this a lot as well, which is why there's a lot of noise about student fees and things like that. But yeah, I mean, if you can find a way to kind of almost have a net and capture lots and lots of wide schools, maybe regions or whole areas, through a select number of key teachers and professors or deliverers or whatever, then, you know, that could be a way to look at, you know, in a time where it's kind of national emergency, how do you bring lots of people together in one and give them the same information? So
yeah, I think the other aspect of education is obviously in a more professional sense and training. And we're seeing, you know, locally in the Humber region, there are lots of experts in AR and virtual reality and other types of mixed reality. And we're seeing them, like their skills being applied to training, like, for example, offshore wind farming, fire prevention, firefighting, etc., etc. So using these technologies to do training in a professional sense as well. And we've created AR systems for pharmaceutical companies to help them train what they do. So there's lots of different applications for education.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Yeah, really definitely. And I think, you know, if we remove sort of the education side and just look at these as institutions, you also have the logistics element. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, being able to track kind of movements of people in terms of student safety. So a lot of these universities have students coming in from various places. Being able to track kind of being able to track where everybody is and all the rest of it, you can help kind of keep those students safe and keep campus safe. So again, lots of different examples of how you could use this data once it's collected. So another example is crime. This is something that's already been used. So authorities are already using real-time data and personal data to take preventative action against crime. So it's something that can be seen even in London. There's examples of facial detection and people looking at sort of preventative crime in terms of, like, should a person be in a certain area? You know, is it someone that matches someone that is wanted, for example? But there's actually much more smart systems out there. So there's systems that can detect whether a gun has been fired, so it can detect a gunshot sound and differentiate it from, you know, a car backfiring or, you know, just a loud sound. So it understands what that is, and it can alert authorities to what could be potential crime. There's also kind of crime mapping platforms where you can see kind of hotspots for particular crimes, and then sort of applying this on a citywide level. Police kind of know where to apply the resources and sort of where to look for certain types of criminals or certain types of criminal activity.
Yeah, so, Jamie, this is very much this is a contentious issue. I think is worth mentioning, because we'll have seen even in Hull alone, if anybody's Hull based around here, there's all sorts of issues with they were talking about having facial recognition in the city, and people were worried about privacy and, you know, being monitored and Big Brother, and you'll have heard all the terms. But most of this is actually going, and a big chunk of it is actually about crime prevention and almost predicting crime. And this word will come up a lot. Prevention and prediction is pretty much the key words that come out the back of this. And we'll see this in health and in crime and in movement and in weather changes and whatever. It's understanding what's going on. And then being able to take actions to either stop it when it happens or even prevent it from happening in the first place. And when it comes to crime, sort of the monitoring of trends of people, you know, if you was to combine somebody's shopping habits, travel habits, leisure habits, if they were going back and forth to a certain city quite a lot or whatever, you know, it's not so much watching each individual, it's understanding the patterns of movement so that you can kind of relate it to other pieces of data and intelligence that comes together to try and piece together the likelihood or probability of something happening in a particular area. You know, is there going to be an uprising in this area with protests or riots, and what preparation do we need to do in that? Is there likely to be an uprising of you know, burglaries in a certain postcode area because there's a change of events coming into town or something like that? You know, I mean, all of these things are ways for the authorities to try and stop something before it happens. And you know, they're doing that. I mean, that's what counter-terrorism is in intelligence. They're already doing this on a mass scale internationally all over the place, but particularly in the US and the Middle East, they're certainly using a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and that's all pulling from real-time analytics to try and predict where crime might happen. And this is ultimately to create safer cities. Now, as I say, it's always going to be an issue that is contentious because people are always worried about being monitored and, you know, how many CCTV cameras they pass and, you know, but, you know, what's strange about it is you're kind of already doing a lot of this stuff. You're using your devices. Most people are using their devices quite publicly in just about every platform you can imagine, and sharing all the data. They may be wearing smartwatches or whatever, which is tracking even their personal health data, where they're moving, what their GPS location is. Maybe you're using your Tesco club card, you know, which is kind of telling you, it's telling people what you're buying, how often you're buying, where you're buying it from. You know, all of this stuff is all data that we're kind of feeding all the time. So I kind of what some of the from a crime point of view and from a smart city point of view is trying to collect that data, understand it, to use it for a greater good, for the greater good of society. And there'll always be pitfalls in that, but that's ultimately what they're trying to do with it. And you know, things like crime are I think a positive way to use it.
Yeah, and I think you've got it kind of nail on the head there. This is one of the few topics that when we talk about smart cities where it does divide people, and it kind of enters that conversation of, you know, just because we can do it, should we do it? And I think, you know, although there is massive benefits to this, I actually wrote an article about this myself last year about the use of AI in crime and crime prevention. And, you know, it's one of those things where it is already being used, some places successfully, some places not so successfully. And, you know, really it depends kind of what level of use it is. And, you know, it will always divide people. But the article I wrote was actually about how we shouldn't be using AI in terms of crime. We shouldn't use AI for as evidence, and there's many reasons behind that. But there is actually sort of various other things that can be done using the idea of a smart city that does reduce crime, that does kind of make people safer. So with a lot of this and this huge amount of data that's being collected, I suppose one of the big conversations is, how do we do this sort of sensibly and responsibly?
Yeah, Kevin, that's a really good point. Kevin's just left us a message just saying it only takes a little bit of spin to change a beneficial use of technology to egregious human rights in China. Yeah, I mean, it is, you could swing it either way, Kevin. You're absolutely right. And depending kind of which side of the coin you're on, you could have a very different perspective as to what the use of this data is. And how we monitor people. And I agree, you know, we haven't got long enough to go into it now, but really you could have just like an endless conversation on this. And there are endless debates and papers and studies and endless things on this information, you know, about racial bias in artificial intelligence and incorrectly kind of prejudging people, you know, based on their habits or how often they go a certain, whatever, you know, there's all sorts of sides to the coin. And I think the argument really, you know, is I think we just need more data, ironically. I think we need to learn more from it. I
think it's more data. And you know, I think Kevin's point kind of hits the nail on the head as well. It's the responsible use of it. You know, I think the idea of a gunshot detection system, you know, here's a gunshot and alert authorities, is a great idea. But on the other hand, you know, in particular, that article I wrote was about racial bias in facial recognition. And, you know, there's lots of cases of people that have been prosecuted for things that they didn't, you know, there wasn't even in the area, but, you know, the algorithm got it wrong and it was used as evidence. So although I think, you know, this idea of you know, smart cities, it's a really powerful and interesting concept. And I think it's the way things are going, whether we like it or not. It's also kind of understanding how that impacts our lives and, you know, us as consumers, as people that are part of these potentially smart cities, as business owners, as whatever else. All kind of have a responsibility to, you know, to understand it and understand, you know, how it should be used in a responsible manner, which is a completely different presentation, and we won't get too far into that one. But
that's crime anyway. That's crime.
Yeah, that's crime. Yes. So the next one that we're going on to is health. Rob, if you're still on call, actually, I think Rob is our health expert, so it probably makes sense for Rob to discuss some of these points.
Yeah, you're just on mute, Rob, just so you know. It's not me this time as well.
You might have that. I'll cover it. So when we're talking about health, already we have huge amounts of you are there. Do you want to take over, Rob?
Yeah, sorry, you muted me again. Sorry, don't worry. Yeah, so I think, look, first thing to talk about quickly here is obviously for people in the Humber, we've got a big digital health smart cities program going already through Connexin, who, as you're probably aware, are a local provider of connectivity and a rival to KCOM, but they're actually looking at how they use their connectivity in the city to do some of this smart city stuff. It's actually worth looking to see what's going on, because it's not just health, it's in a lot of the other topics we're talking about. But what Connexin appears to be doing is looking at how they prevent health problems, looking at how people access patient data, but also looking at how they address the stretched resources of the NHS. And they've got a number of things going on. They're using IoT devices to look at patients' health and monitor it. They're looking at sensing in the hospital environment to make sure the patients are comfortable. They've actually built a health operating system as well, which is bringing together data for the patients into one place to understand it. So they're doing something quite interesting already, probably worth looking at that if you're in this region. But what they're looking at really is more health system, NHS level, whereas I think there's a bigger opportunity to look at how we improve people's health before they get before they're unwell, and therefore improve their health and improve outcomes and save lives and save money. And just to sort of talk about that a little bit on this slide. So we already know that citizens are collecting and sharing their own health data. So if you have an Apple Watch or a Strava account or a Fitbit, you're effectively measuring aspects of your health. A Fitbit's looking at things like heart rate variability, number of steps, physical activity. Some of the more sophisticated devices can look at blood pressure. So you can see that these devices that people are wearing are already giving people massive insight into their health. Whether they can make sense of that themselves depends on the operating system they're interfacing with on the technology, but basically it's collecting data that could potentially save your life. Also, another thing is citizens are accessing advanced diagnostics potentially. So you can actually pay £100 and have your genome measured. So your genome is your genetic code, and your genetic code gives you a very deep insight into your health and can predict what risks you may have. So you may have a predisposition for breast cancer or cardiovascular disease or something more benign. But all of these things allow you to take action and adjust your lifestyle or speak to a healthcare professional to deal with it. So we already know people are collecting data to look at health. Now, we can also access health in very different ways. So traditionally, you would go and see your GP would then refer you to someone, and you would go and see a more specialist healthcare provider, probably in a hospital setting, or you might go down to the pharmacist and talk to a pharmacy assistant or a pharmacist. But all of these things require you to do something. And men specifically are very poor at accessing health because of all these barriers and impediments. They don't like talking about health, but generally speaking, it's not particularly convenient. But there are lots of ways you can do this through technology now. So Babylon is effectively a way of seeing a GP using FaceTime or a telephone call. And this has been around for quite a few years now, but it's effectively making it easier to see your GP. They also offer lots of services like giving you blood tests, etc. So you can do all of this without leaving your house, which basically means that you can access health in a much more convenient way. Now, all of these things are effectively building up a personalized picture of our own health. And that allows us to do something which we call creating a digital twin. So if you're collecting all of the information like how much have I slept, what's my blood pressure, what was my GP saying to me, what's my genomics, then that allows you to create a digital twin of yourself. Now the healthcare system can access that digital twin to figure out what you should do to stay fit and healthy. So it might be telling you to lose 5 kilograms, it might be telling you to eat less sugar, it might be telling you you've got a high risk of cervical cancer, go and have a smear. Or it might be sending you some diagnostic tests in the post. So you can see how you can create quite an interesting and complex web that addresses health. And I don't know anyone who's actually doing this in any detailed way in the UK. As I said, Connexin are doing something that seems quite limited to the NHS structure. But for a city like ours, which we're talking from Hull here, but a post-industrial working class town, with low life expectancy and relatively unhealthy behaviours, there's massive things that could be improved, and that could be really enacted through a digital health system at a city level. So we have great connectivity in this town, so we can actually use that connectivity to basically harvest data as they walk through the infrastructure, the network. So you could look at having count how many steps people do, see how often people go to McDonald's, whatever it is that's got a health benefit, we can use our network to leverage that. And then the other aspect of this is gamification. So if you want to improve health, you have to comply with whatever it is you've been asked to do, and you can do that by building some form of gamification or reward system. So reward could be in the sense of, let's visualize your data and show how you're improving, maybe make it competitive, like how much weight can you lose, how many milligrams of how many millimeters of mercury can you reduce your blood pressure by, etc., etc. We can use some of those elements of gamification that digital's so good at doing to shift people's behaviour in a more healthy direction. So as I say, health has got a massive opportunity for a smart city programme. Hull would be a great test bed for something like that, because you have lots of health issues and great connectivity, and we're already making a bit of a progress of this through the council and what they're doing with Connexin. There you go, Jamie. That's my blurb on that.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
And just to relate that, just to what does that mean on a smart city level? Well, I mean, an issue that's been raised quite publicly recently by the MPs here, particularly Emma Hardy, is vascular disease, of which Hull is particularly prevalent for, and there's a lot of people losing limbs and things that don't really need to do that. And so that's something that has to be addressed on almost a systemic level, really, rather than kind of individually each one going to their to their GP rather and having individual treatments and stuff. Why is it so prevalent in this particular area of the country, in this particular city? And therefore it becomes a city issue, and therefore if it's a city issue, we need to understand the data of what's causing that. And as Rob touched upon, then the movement of people, where we're eating, the type of work we're doing, how often we socialize, all of this stuff kind of feeds into that. It feeds into our lifestyle, and then by understanding our lifestyle, we can then start as a society implementing things to try and affect that in a more positive way, and hopefully reduce the impact from things such as vascular disease or other related diseases that might be affecting a particular nation. Obesity might be a thing or whatever. So it's really interesting actually how you can affect the health of the population, and that plays back into kind of that smart city. It's not just about connecting buildings and machinery, but it's also how it affects ultimately the people, the citizens of that city.
Yeah, I think health is a good example as well of how this kind of data can be used not just for other data outputs or digital outputs, but actually in terms of real world planning and city planning. So for example, we know through things like Fitbit that actually lots of small actions and small changes in our life can actually lead to very positive long-term health impacts. So if you have an area, for example, that is particularly bad in terms of cases of obesity, then in your city planning, by putting some more stairs in that area, actually you could have a direct impact on that issue, just by these kind of very small changes. But you can only kind of do that if you have the data and you have the insight in the first place to look at ways to improve people's lives. So I think that's just like a really simple yet interesting kind of way that you could, use that data. So just check, I've got a question. Why not connect someone's medical records to a QR code so the data could be pulled off anytime? I think that's another example that people have looked at, and something that can definitely be brought into this idea of a smart city is medical records. And obviously it's well known that getting access to medical records and the way that they're stored and accessed is not always the most efficient, but by having that digitized, as Rob said, bringing that sort of idea of a digital twin into it, not only do you have the kind of medical history, but you have, how many steps are they doing and what kind of lifestyle are they living. So you're able to give them a much more personalized diagnosis and telling them kind of things that would help them. And probably by having all that data, you may be able to give them almost like predictive diagnostics as well. So if you know that they've had trouble with the heart, for example, but they're living a very sort of static lifestyle and they're not sort of walking and they're eating certain foods, then you could probably sort of assume that that situation isn't going to get any better and may get worse. So that's something that you can alert them to and inform them.
Yeah, Jamie, I mean, that's right. And it's what we was referring to earlier on. You know, there's lots of pieces of data out there, you know, the stuff that you feed into Fitbit, the stuff you feed into Babylon, if you use that, the stuff you feed into your GP, you know, there are digitized medical records now, and you can actually get them on your NHS app if you download it, and you can access a certain amount of information that it pulls through from there, your vaccination history and certain things like that. But you're absolutely right, Kevin. You know, like if you start piecing all that stuff together, you know, then you can start becoming a bit more predictive in terms of how your personal health is likely to be affected, but also as a whole, how a region's health is likely to be affected. And you can start tying in all sorts of things to that: weather impact, flooding impact. It might be loneliness, how often you're socializing. I mean, there's endless things. You know, there's smart fridges now, how often you're opening your fridge, how often you're having a daily shop. I mean, really, it's endless, this information. And there's people individually, I have to say, in Hull alone, that we know of, that are working on really cool stuff that are tackling each of these issues, you know, how to address these issues and digitize it and then use the data to make improvements or predict or make it better. But I agree, if you can piece this stuff together, yeah, I mean, it could be a lifesaver to a paramedic. Yeah, that information would be good to know, you know. I mean, if they've got particular allergies, if they're prone to a particular thing. I mean, it goes on and on. You could go on for this stuff forever. So it's a really good point. But ultimately, the point of it in health is, again, if you can connect what's happening in the city and the way the citizens are living and behaving and working, and you know, and you can then affect that by, as Jamie says, you know, changing the city planning, or maybe, you know, they've been introducing cycle lanes here in Hull. Again, you know, it's a depends which side of the coin you're on, whether or not you're into it or not. But ultimately, if you can do that based on data and use that data in some way to make for the betterment of the society, then, you know, that's a smart city, in my opinion. And then, you know, you've just kind of got to keep chalking at it to get it right. You know, it's never going to please everybody, but, you know, really what we're talking about today is the capabilities of what's possible, and if we just think a little bit differently about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And a sort of more universal sort of use of this, and something that actually we're seeing already in the UK, is how we can use smart cities to improve commerce and business. So this is actually in Milton Keynes. They already have robot delivery services. So basically they have automated delivery robots that can take your shopping, take whatever you've bought and take it from the shop to your door without any need for human intervention. So this is kind of something that a lot of companies are already experimenting with, and everyone's probably already seen that Amazon are looking at things like the drones that can take your delivery from that kind of last point to your door, that kind of last mile, and really speed up the delivery process, also taking a lot of cars off the road. So the other benefit to this, other than speedy delivery and getting things much more quickly, is that, you know, these are much smaller devices. They're either, you know, a small robot like this, they're a drone, they're in the air. So we're taking off traffic off the road. They're all electric, or as far as I'm aware, pretty much all of these examples are electric. So we're reducing carbon. So all in all, it's kind of all adding to this kind of betterment of the city.
Yeah, I mean, again, for business, you could go on about this I mean, the examples we've given here are cool robots and drones and things which are happening. And we can learn a lot from Milton Keynes, actually, because the Lycas are a very flat city, and so they have a great cycle network and all this kind of stuff, because it's a great place to trial this kind of stuff. But yeah, if you come away from some of that stuff, I mean, data, just in terms of footfall, what the town centre looks like, we already now, I still get emails today from the city centre authority, the bid authority, telling me kind of what the footfall is around certain shopping centres and whatever. That information is valuable because we know the movement of people, and we can see the changes of the movement in people in certain times of the year, or if there's certain things happening, or the weather affects it or whatever. And by knowing that, we can then pivot kind of what happens as part of the city centre experience to work around kind of what that movement is. You know, so once you have that data, you can start affecting just about every, and businesses, what's interesting about businesses is they're connected to every aspect of this. So the stuff that we're talking about in terms of mobility, in terms of health, in terms of entertainment, footfall, whatever it is we're touching upon, business falls off the back of that in some vein or other, because ultimately business thrives off people. And if the people, by knowing how the people are behaving, working, acting, living, we can pivot the business to move to that. And that's kind of the crux of this whole conversation, actually, which is that the need for businesses to be particularly to understand this and understand digital technology and the capabilities of it are vital, because if you don't understand the digital first customer and the digital first environments that we're in, then it's going to be really hard for you as a commercial entity to pivot what you're doing to adjust to it. And again, we're seeing lots and lots of examples of disruption, and we haven't got time to go into it today, but I mean, that's what we do for a living. We deal with disruption, and it's everywhere. It's absolutely rife. You've probably heard in the last couple of days the whole thing with Arcadia Group, which is kind of Topman and Burton's and all that. Staples of our high street, looking like sadly they're not going to be around. And that's because it's an old school business model that relies on people walking into the town centre, walking into the shop and buying a pair of jeans and a jacket or whatever. And it's completely reliant on that, and was very, very successful at that for a period of time. But the time has moved, and that we were in a different time. We're living and shopping and buying differently, and we want things differently. And therefore the business has to have the agility to move to that. And it doesn't matter how big you are. If you don't, then unfortunately you're in real danger of disruption. And this is why the need to be innovative and be disruptive and think differently is vital. And that plays very much into smart cities.
I think on that note as well, these kind of things, as well as it being kind of an accessibility thing, and you can have a much smaller vehicle transporting things around. You're obviously, looking at some form of cost saving by having this as well. If you have an army of, delivery drones or robots or whatever, you don't have to have a driver for each of those, which means that you're reducing costs. And for a business, you're kind of making yourself more sustainable and reducing the risk to yourself.
Yeah, Kevin, your point there as well. Another great thing for a city, guiding blind people, disabilities around the city to, using a beacon approach or some form of connected to their phone. Maybe it vibrates. We already have really interesting stuff with Google Maps now, where it can literally guide you around the city. And you're doing none of the work, by vibrating on your watch or whatever, to tell you to turn left or right, to stop, to start. So all of that stuff is there, it's bringing all this stuff together. And that's, again, coming back to this point of smart cities. We have technology. We know it's advancing. We know it's doing amazing stuff. And we're using it for all these separate little pots of stuff for various commercial gains and advancement gains. But actually, if you start bringing that stuff together and linking all these things, then you can actually get full-on societal gains, because you can really influence the way a whole area works.
Yeah, and people are already looking at this on a much bigger level as well. I mean, obviously, this is talking about sort of individual cases where you order a takeaway, you order something from Amazon, and your package is delivered in this automated way. But there's actually a lot of companies that are looking at sort of large kind of haulage type things and autonomous trucks and things that can essentially, haul huge amounts of materials to one place, from one place to another. Completely automated without sort of a driver. I know that those are still in sort of early stage developments and they're sort of being tested out in America at the moment. But essentially this could lead to something where all of these logistics and all these, deliveries and things are much more quicker, much more efficient, much more cost effective, which, gives us much easier access to all these things that we need.
Yeah, Jay, I'm slightly conscious of time, Jay, because we're running a bit shy. So we'll just wrap up these final examples and then we can...
Yeah, we're at the end anyway. So, and the final one is, when we're looking at commerce, is actually the idea of, as we've mentioned, and we keep mentioning this idea of data, bringing that data and then applying it to the real world. So we already see examples of this in things like AR, and there's lots of different AR apps. There's actually AR apps out there right now that help you shop and can give you information and can help you find better deals. But there's a lot of examples out there of things like smart glass as well. So you can actually have the shop front to a window, the shop front to your shop and the window itself with overlay information on it. So you could have information about deals that are inside and things like that. And there's an example of a shopping centre somewhere, I can't remember where it was, that used the idea of smart glass and the idea of tracking somebody, so tracking an individual around the shop. So in the very same way that we sort of Google something, and then, 20 minutes later when we go on Facebook, we're seeing ads for the thing we've just seen. They looked at how to bring this into the real world. So if you go in a shop and you kind of hover around a particular jacket for a while, it knows that you're probably kind of interested in it, but maybe aren't too sure about purchasing it. So essentially, through the smart displays and through the advertising in the shopping centre, essentially ads for that would almost like follow you about, or there would be things tailored to you shown on those different screens to try and basically increase the chance of that sale. So I think that was just like an experimental use of it, but really interesting. Kind of shows where the future of commerce may be when we're looking at this sort of smart city and things tying together. And one that we've probably all seen, and actually this is kind of one of the main rollouts of smart cities and why it's being done, is the idea of sustainability. So it's monitoring weather, monitoring energy use, and using that to kind of make cities more sustainable and tackle things like air quality and emissions. So in our particular area, I know that we are an area that's massively at risk of flooding. So we already have a lot of early warning systems in place, and a lot of the smart city work that is going on in Hull in particular right now is about creating flood defence and creating early warning flood systems. So this is probably one of the most obvious and almost instantly beneficial uses of this technology, that we can, sort of protect the cities that we live in and protect our residents.
Yeah, I mean, it connects again very nicely to all of this stuff, really. Schools and places where young people are, particularly, there's a lot of talk around air quality and, whether you have, whether the school run really needs to be done in the car, and how many cars have got their engines idling outside the school gates and all that kind of stuff. I mean, all of this stuff, again, matters because the data from understanding that really affects kind of the health of the city. Ultimately, it affects the health of the nation, and naturally, it's kind of gone quiet for the last few months because of the pandemic situation. But the big global emergency, of course, is climate change and the carbon emissions, and the Humber are really striving forward to be game changers in this, to be innovators and to be leaders in reducing carbon emissions and living a clean life ultimately, and having clean areas. And that data is vital. And of course, places like Hull, or if you're near a estuary or whatever, but like Hull sits in a bowl essentially, and so when it gets wet and it floods, we really feel it. And unfortunately, people have really experienced that in not too distant past. And that we can put up all the walls we want, and to protect against that. But ultimately, it's only kind of small time stuff. Really, there has to be a much more grander systemic effect and to stop that happening. And again, understanding the data of that is going to be vitally important. And that's what we're using now to try and change what the future of that looks like. Yeah, fish odor. Yeah, there is definitely a smell. Thanks, Kevin, in this part of the neck of the woods as well. Yeah, so that's probably quite helpful. But yeah, so it affects all of these environmental things. So it's really interesting. But yeah, go on, Jamie. Do you want to wrap up there?
Yeah. So just to wrap up what we've gone through, I mean, we've kind of touched on a lot of different points as we've gone through this. But essentially, the focus is on, and the focus of all of these webinars, whether it's this one or any of the future ones or previous ones, is about embracing digital and the importance of digital in our lives and business. So technology will continue to grow. It will be something that is going to become a bigger part of our lives, whether we like it to or not. It just will. And whether it's on a really large, grand scale, like the smart cities we've been discussing, or on a much smaller level, like, digitizing your account system in your business, it doesn't really matter. At some point, digital will become a bigger thing, and it is going to take over a lot of the things that we do. So we need to be embracing of it, and if used correctly, it's a very powerful tool that helps us, which is kind of the focus of all of these webinars. It's showing why digital is a positive thing and why we should be embracing it. Some of the things we've talked about today seem quite kind of grand, but actually cities and regions all over the world are becoming much smarter and connecting this data anyway. Hull, where we are, is doing the exact same thing and is going through a massive digital transformation right now, and so are probably nearly all the kind of cities and regions in the country. Everyone is looking at digitizing and connecting in some way, because that is the way things are going, and it makes our cities much smarter. So we've covered the kind of various different factors that would be impacted, but also there's much more factors beyond that, and our very, our everyday lives and our business and all of those things are impacted by this rollout of digital. Innovation will play a crucial role in this. And when we talk about innovation, we always say to people, it's not just about kind of future planning and this pie in the sky stuff. It's also about survival and resilience today. So looking at kind of what is coming in the future and what these rollouts may look like, embracing that now, preparing yourself for it, and sort of looking at how that could benefit you, that also kind of makes you resilient and actually turns what could be a problem into an opportunity. And kind of what I've just said there, but businesses need to be digital ready and agile. So when this happens, they're able to roll with it and kind of, turn it into a positive. So we'll go through some of the support available and actually how we can help with, some of this digital adoption. You're on mute, Wayne.
Sorry, I keep getting them on mute. I'll just wrap up quite quickly, guys. Yeah. So as I said, the webinars are one part of the support that the Growth Hub offers, and there's multiple areas of support. So I would just say if you go to the website, for the Humber Growth Hub website, you'll see all of that stuff on there. There's loads of things in there in terms of support. But one of the key things is in addition to the webinars, I'll just let you know about the next ones that are coming up. So one on the 4th of December, how to plan an effective business website. And the one after that, upskilling for digital, training a digital ready workforce. Those are the next two that are coming up, but there's actually a whole list of webinars covering every topic you can imagine. There's a link there, an Eventbrite link there, but it's probably easier if you just go to the Grow My SME website. All of the events are on there. You can just sign up for them just as you have for this one. I'll probably post a link in the chat actually, just because it'll be a lot easier than pointing this out. But what else is there? So there's a program called Digital Catalyst, and I think it's worth you being aware of it, because it's a one-to-one tailored direct support by specialists like ourselves. Essentially, the Edenic are consultants on the Digital Catalyst program, and there's lots of other consultants from all different backgrounds and experiences. But ultimately, it's one-to-one support that comes and works with your business directly to help you embrace digital technology, or if you're already using digital technology, enhance that and help you to. The purpose is to help you use digital to make your business grow and help you survive. And covering all the stuff we've talked about today, the agility is going to be vital. So how does it work? Well, so firstly, you're assigned a consultant. So it might be someone from Edenic, or it might be another consultant. We do a digital benchmark with you. So this is understanding where you are at now. What does your business currently do in terms of digital adoption? How do you think about digital? What processes are you using that are digital? Etc., etc. The next part after that, off the back of that, is then to run a workshop with you, using the results of the digital benchmark, but also the conversations that we have during that benchmarking to understand your business, to then focus on particular areas where we can help you. It might be to develop new products, it might be to open new markets, grow your profits, it might be to streamline the business, it might be to reduce costs, it might be to make it easier to work, it might be to recruit. It could cover any number of things. And what role can digital technology play in that? And everyone's individual and everyone's unique, so every output is very, very different. Out the back of the workshop, it then gets converted into an action plan. So this is what we found, and then how can you physically action that? What does that look like? And then brokerage. So that's connecting you to either technology providers, for example, to build things maybe that we've discovered that you could be using, or it might be linking you to new funding or further support or further training or whatever comes out the back of it. So that we go beyond just giving you a workshop, but actually give you a process to action the stuff that we found, and linking you to providers and people in the local economy that can help you do this stuff. So what are the sort of things we're talking about? Well, as I said, it might be developing new products, it might be enhancing the customer offer, it might be growing and attracting and retaining new staff, it might be making you cyber safe. Cybersecurity is a big one, so maybe it's looking at that side of the business. You know, it might be working more efficiently, making it cheaper to run your day-to-day operations. Some example projects, and as it says, it's far from exhaustive, so you know, take it with a pinch of salt, you know, because it could literally be anything. But moving operations into cloud, yeah, introducing an e-commerce element to the business, online accounting, as Jamie mentioned, cybersecurity, maybe implementing a CRM system so you can understand customers better. But our job here is to kind of help you identify which technologies could add value to your business, what offers the most value for money, what offers highest return, what are the knock-on effects of introducing new technologies, how to integrate into existing systems, how to implement and manage it. As I say, you know, it's endless where we can go, but what do we want? Ultimately, we want the business to grow. We want it to be agile. We need it to be flexible. We need it to be resilient. As you've seen off the back of COVID, those are the three key terms that we'd need more than ever. Increased efficiency, making sure you're safe, making sure you're keeping your staff. Sorry, I'm flicking through this quite quickly because I'm just aware of time. But you get the point. Ultimately, it's coming to handhold, one-to-one support, working with you. What's out there, what's available, how can you apply it to your business, and how can it help you grow? It's free of charge. It's around about 12 hours of support, something like that. All you have to do is register for it, and then an advisor will get assigned to you. Jamie, do you want to just post it? Can you post it in the chat? Just the link, or we'll post the link in the chat. So this is the link, growmysme.co.uk/ICT/digital catalyst. We'll post that in the chat so you can access it a bit easier. But also there's a telephone number on there that you can call, the whole number, or you can email digitalcatalyst@winningmoves.com. But any three of those call to actions will enable you to just register interest, and then someone can speak to you about what the possibility is.
So I think what would be worth mentioning as well is, I know that within this presentation and in some of the presentations we've delivered, we do talk about these kind of quite grand projects and these larger scale things. But regardless of what your business is, whoever you are, whatever kind of service you provide, we found that, you know, using digital can help you do all the things that have, you know, just been said. So through this program, we've worked with, you know, a variety of different people, from hairdressers to, you know, larger businesses. And as Rob mentioned earlier, you know, we've worked with large pharmaceutical companies and small companies and local companies. So it doesn't matter what scale you're at or what kind of service you provide. You know, embracing digital can help you grow and help your business become more sustainable.
Yeah. Thanks, Jamie. Okay, I'm just going to launch. Oh no, I can't do that because it's gone. Can you launch the poll?
I'll launch it.
Yeah. We're just going to launch a quick poll as well. If you wouldn't mind just taking 30 seconds just to answer the couple of questions on there. This just helps us understand whether the webinars we're delivering are relevant. You're getting the information you want from it, if it's interesting, and obviously helps the Growth Hub kind of procure and tailor the right topics to meet what's needed by the community and the business community. So if you take 30 seconds just to answer that, that would be really great. And we're happy if you want to ask any questions. We're still on. We have run over slightly, but we're here if you'd like to ask anything. This webinar will be available on the Growth Hub's YouTube channel as well. So if you want to review it later on or look at it again, or if you want to speak to Edenic directly and understand what we do as innovation consultants, and you know, this is the stuff we're talking to you about today is exactly what we do for a living with businesses all around the world. So edenicinnovations.com if you'd like to see more about us and the services that we offer, or feel free to reach out to us we can happily talk to you about any of that stuff. But with that, thanks to Jamie for taking us through that. Rob, thanks for jumping on there. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. So thanks very much for taking part. Take care now.
Thanks, guys.